Sometimes it feels like the sun will never rise, like the birds will never sing again. Believe in a power greater than what you are going through. When you don't know what to do, keep breathing.
That's right. When you don't know what to do, just keep on breathing. Broadcasting from Huntington Beach, California, and New York City, coast to coast. A big LA welcome and a big Apple welcome to all my listeners out there in Radio Land. I am Dave, the Caregiver's Caregiver, on the Caregiver Dave radio show, coming to you live from the syndicated All Positive Talk Radio Network, healthylife.net, broadcasting in all 50 states and 135 countries with my lovely co-host, Adrienne Gruberg from the Caregiver Space. Say hello, Adrienne.
Hello.
And our guest today is John Vespasian. I hope I said that right. He's an author of 11, count them, 11 books about rational thinking, including When Everything Fails, Try This, Rationality is the Way to Happiness, The Philosophy of Builders, The 10 Principles of Rational Living, Rational Working, Consistency, the Key to Permanent Stress Relief, and many more. I think his latest one is The Shortcut to Success When Success Seems Impossible. So can you see a common theme in all those books, Adrienne? It has to do with being rational. And my God, if caregivers can only be rational and think with their brain instead of their heart and their emotions. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't think with your emotions. I say emotions should have 49%, voting rights and logic and rationality should have 51%. Always have veto power, because otherwise you're just going to be flagrant in the wind, you know? Yeah. Anyway, getting back to our guest here, I want to thank our last week's guest, Dr. Bernie Siegel. He is an amazing guy, and you can, just a reminder, you can hear that podcast, that radio show, and all our shows on our Caregiver Dave website and all the other platforms that I mentioned earlier. If you go right now to caregiverdave.com and click the free download tab, you will get some free gifts just for giving us your name and your email. Don't ever let a free gift go unclaimed. That's what my dad always used to say. But hey, enough of that. I want to take this opportunity and let's welcome to the show John Vespasian. Did I say that right, John?
Yes, perfect pronunciation. Thanks,
Perfect.
Dave.
Did you hear that, Adrienne? Perfect enunciation.
Very nice.
John, I'd like to ask my guest, just who is John Vespasian and why was he put on this earth?
Yes, John Vespasian is an author of 11 books now, books about something very weird I called rational living. And it's a philosophy I've developed through research in the last 11 years. What I do basically is to read and to go through hundreds and hundreds of biographies of people in different professions, different centuries, different countries, and try to extract from those principles, practical principles we can use today in the 21st century. And why do I emphasize the aspect of rationality? And this is, I think, is a key aspect of my books. Today, if you open any book about personal development, personal finance, success, it will speak about positive thinking. Positive thinking, you have to be very enthusiastic, you have to be very extrovert, you have to be very cheerful. In my books, I take the opposite approach. I try to recommend strategies for people who are not particularly extrovert, people who are not particularly positive, because I think for most people, a very large percentage of the population, it is very difficult to stay positive. It consumes a lot of energy. So I try to come up with strategies that you can implement even if you have low energy, even if you are not a super positive person. Still, I think you can become very successful and very happy by applying common sense and by trying to think a little bit more rationally.
Well, this sounds like something I need to hear.
And it sounds like something caregivers need to hear because you just described everything that a caregiver is. So why don't I ask you some questions? Why is wishful thinking so prevalent in our society? And because I know when I was a caregiver, what am I talking about? I'm still a caregiver, but I'm sure when Adrian was a caregiver, right? We would wish, oh, I wish this would happen. Oh, I wish that so and so wouldn't be so such and such, and all of that. We were always wishing, but that's pretty normal for people, isn't it? Not just for caregivers. Why is it so prevalent?
Well, there's a problem that arises from the excessive exposure to entertainment, and this is something that we have in the 21st century. We didn't have it 100 years ago. People are watching TV series not only on Netflix but on the phone, on YouTube. Constantly watching fiction, which is very entertaining, it's very compelling, very exciting, but still fiction. The problem is that it develops an ingrained tendency for wishful thinking, for expecting a turn of events that is very unlikely, that is going to solve the problem, like it often happens in Hollywood movies, on TV. And this is not real life. When you watch TV, you should watch this fiction 4-5 hours a day for years. It's very difficult to tell reality from fiction, because in the end, the people on TV become your friends, become your family. And this is a very detrimental pattern you see today. You see in the US alone, you have 50 million people taking medication against anxiety, high stress. It's a very, very high number. It is pretty much the same in Europe. And the problem is not that these people suffer from some mysterious sickness. The problem is they have, in most cases, very unrealistic expectations. And when they crash against the wall, they become extremely anxious, extremely depressed. So what I try to do in my books is to steer away from these fairy tales, from this wishful thinking, and to try to make people more realistic.
Wow. So I'm thinking of one of the 10 Commandments right now. Do you know what it is, Adrian?
No.
Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's goods, right? And that's what Hollywood is doing. We look.
Well, I would say a lot of the unrealistic expectations come from celebrity. The focus is so much on celebrity. The schools are just full of people who want to be stars, and that's I think fueled by this entertainment epidemic.
Yeah,
is depression a byproduct of that?
Yeah, but even if you focus on celebrity, the problem is that you don't have enough information. Because if you watch one of these influencers on social media, people taking pictures of themselves every 5 minutes and this kind of stuff,
right?
And they have these millions of followers. You get a picture of a lifestyle which is fake. It's completely fake. This is going on already for decades. Problem now, yes. it has become blown out of proportion. But even if, in my book, for instance, I analyze very often the biographies of celebrities to show people that the idea you get about perfect lifestyle, perfect people, perfect wealth, most of the time is nonsense. When you look at the real story, when you see the whole picture, you realize that there is a lot of trial and error. There is a lot of mistakes. There is a lot of suffering behind. I mean, how many of these celebrities have committed suicide? I mean, we're not talking about Marilyn Monroe. A few years ago, it was a shock for many people that Robin Williams committed suicide. He was a great comedian. People thought him very funny, but in the end, he committed suicide. So you have to look at the full picture. And there
Anthony
are many
Bourdain,
celebrities.
Kate Spade are the most modern ones.
Please.
Yeah.
A lot.
It is deplorable, but I think you are much better in whatever profession you are. If you are a caregiver or you are even you have a profession of high risk, I think it's better to take a perspective which is more rational, which is more close to reality, because you will make better decisions. You will be more patient with your customers, with your patients, with yourself, which is super important, and you will be able to improve your career much better. If you become extremely emotional, the chances that you make mistake after mistake are very, very high.
And you're setting yourself up for disappointment.
At the very least. But the problem is that when people start becoming very anxious because they feel they are not successful enough, they are not progressing in their careers, they don't have all these magical gifts that you see on TV series, you see in Hollywood, they feel very insecure. And this is one of the aspects I underline in my books. If you really stick to the facts, if you develop a plan for improving your career, improving your business, improving your finances, if you take real people, I mean people you know the truth of, and this is what I present in my books because I go through very detailed biographies, and you see how they became successful, how they went through adversity, how they actually were able to turn around situations that were desperate. Then you become inspired by their example, and then you can deal with very difficult situations. For instance, in my books, I really present a lot of biographies of people who were badly injured due to accidents, or people who went through severe sickness, and I explain the mentality and the strategy they took to recover. There are strategies you can learn from history, but there is very little you can learn from celebrities.
Yeah, in your book you talk about narrowing down your choices to obvious winners. What does that mean? It means not having so many people that you idolize, narrow it down to one or two. Is that what you're saying, or you're saying something else?
Yeah, let me give you an example. One of the biographies I present it's not in this book, in the book before, was a guitar player. His name was Django Reinhardt. He was a very famous guitar player in the 1940s, 1950s. And not many people know that he suffered a very severe accident when he was in his 20s. I mean, he was a gypsy. He was living in a van in Belgium. He could barely read because he never went to school. His only skill was to play guitar. I mean, he was going from village to village in his van, and he was playing guitar. And I mean, barely earning a living, but he didn't know anything else, and he wanted to become a famous performer. And one night, when he was in his van, he didn't have electricity at the time, so they were using candles for lighting. And during the night, a candle was upturned, and the van caught fire. So by the time he woke up, the van was on fire. He had to go through the fire, and he got burned very badly. He lost the use of one of his fingers. And for a guitar player, this is the kiss of death. I mean, you cannot really play guitar with 9 fingers. And the guy went, and this is why we're talking about narrowing down your choices. He went through depression for a few months because, I mean, he didn't have any skills. He could not earn a living. He would never become a famous musician. And what did he do? And this is a strategy that I recommend in my book over and over again. When you're facing one of these desperate situations, you think that you cannot go any further, that life has mistreated you, the best option is to look into history and to find an example of someone who has done something similar and recovered. And there are many, many examples. And this is what Reinhardt did. He looked into history and asked, has anybody in history played a guitar with 9 fingers? And the answer is no. But people have been playing violin, they playing piano with enormous incapacities. So he figured out, after some research, that he could find a way to play guitar with 9 fingers if he played a little bit faster. And he trained and trained, and after 2 months he could play guitar very, very fast, because this is the only way to make up for the loss of 1 finger. And he became extremely famous almost within the next year, because he developed a way of playing guitar which was very fast, by mixing gypsy music and jazz music. And he became a world-famous star. He was touring the United States with the Duke Ellington Orchestra.
Wow.
And it was a guy who normally should have been an invalid for the rest of his life. And he turned around by taking the choice, the narrow choice that he could find in history. And this is what I really recommend in my books. Don't try to crash against the wall. Don't become depressed. Find an obvious example of something that is working.
Yeah, you know, my wife's the same way. She's lost her speech, became paralyzed on one side, and yet she decided she's just going to do everything she did before, and she can do about 95% of what she did before, and she's amazing, makes us all look like whiners and complainers. It's like a cross between Martha Stewart and Wonder Woman. But we're going to take a break. We'll be right back. Don't go away. And we're back with my guest, John Vespasian, and my guest host, Adrienne Gruberg. Actually, she's more than a guest host now. It seems like she's my permanent co-host. And we are talking about being rational. And we're on the Caregiver Dave show. So, John, how do you find workable strategies where no actions seem to be possible? You know, let's say you try to think of somebody who's in your position and you can't because you have it worse than anybody else that's ever happened. I mean, you know, I think of someone like Helen Keller. If she was alive today, you know, I can't think of too many people that have got it like Helen Keller do, right? You were blind, you couldn't talk, and what else? She had a whole bunch of stuff going on with her. Deaf. And, you know, in the days that she was living in, people just put handicapped and disabled people, you know, in a corner somewhere just to, you know, be isolated because we didn't want to see them. So what do you have to say for someone like that?
Yes, she was a great example, but nowadays you can find examples in many areas because many people are being restrained in their capacities. I mean, now we're in the middle of this COVID pandemic where many people cannot even go to work, they cannot develop their careers, and they feel constrained. In these situations where you have a discapacity or you cannot really work or you have gone through divorce or bankruptcy, the advice I've learned from history is that you will do substantially better if you deploy your resources in an asymmetric way. And this is the title of my latest book, Asymmetry, because if you try to compete or to recover or to try to do what you were doing before in the same way as you were doing that before, usually it will not work. You will have to find a way around, you will have to find a way to redeploy your resources. So for instance, I mean, if you cannot do certain things because you become discapacitated and you cannot read or you cannot do something, try to use your other senses. Try to learn from hearing, like Helen Keller was doing. Yesterday I was reading a biography before preparing for my next book, and I read about a person who could not read because he had some really severe eyesight impairment. What she did was to listen to tapes and to try to learn other languages, and eventually she ended up speaking four foreign languages in addition to her mother tongue, that was German. She did it in a period of 8 years. It's still amazing because she was learning just from hearing. This is something you can do. I mean, whatever your impairment, whatever your limitations, if you try to do things in a different way, in an asymmetric way, which I call in my book, you will do much better. You will not be able to learn or to work in the linear way that other people are doing because they have like a normal environment or normal conditions. But if you use what you have, your resources, your physical resources, your intellectual resources, your financial resources asymmetrically, and you deploy those in a very effective way, you can do things that are amazing. I mean, now that we have this crisis and I see many businesses are closed and I see many people who are not able to do their work, use your time productively to learn new things, learn new skills, to think up new products, new marketing strategies. Use your time, use your resources, whatever your discapacities, whatever your constraints, you can do better. But don't become depressed, don't become discouraged just because you cannot advance linearly. Try to think up an asymmetric strategy that can move you forward.
I'm reminded of that old saying that says, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. That's kind of what you're talking about. Now, what about the people who have one failure after another? I mean, I think of Richard Nixon. He kept losing elections. Abraham Lincoln kept losing elections. Yet something kept bringing them back, right? And both of them became president of the United States. So what do you tell people who just had, like Thomas Edison, failure after failure? I think he had like 10,000 failures for the light bulb, and then finally it turned on. How do those people keep going?
Well, it's very good to have motivation, but you have to improve with every attempt, with every trial. I mean, you just repeat, because, I mean, you are talking about Edison when he was making experiments for the incandescent bulb, but obviously he was trying something different with the experiment. He was not repeating the whole thing 10,000 times. It was a different experiment. And it is the same when you're talking about the careers of people, and you see, they tried once, they tried two, they tried three times, and eventually they did it. I can tell you that every time was a little bit better and a little bit different. And for instance, in the latest book, I present the career of Dale Carnegie, a very famous American bestseller writer. He wrote books about how to make friends and how to influence people and this kind of stuff. When you read the books, you get the idea that this guy started with these fantastic notions, and he wrote the books and became very famous. But this is absolutely not true. It's just what you were saying. This guy at the beginning was a salesman. He was a very unsuccessful salesman. Eventually, he gave up sales. He wanted to become an actor, and he went to New York. He enrolled in the Academy of Dramatic Arts. He wanted to be an actor, and he graduated. He could not land any role. He went to many auditions, and he didn't manage. And eventually, he ended up teaching courses, evening courses for adults. And after 10 years, he wrote his first book, and it was a failure. And then he wrote the second book. So when you look at the story, you see, this guy was always trying, this guy was always there. No, he was failure after failure after failure. And each time, he improved a little bit. It took him 15 years, and eventually you see the story and say, this guy was amazing from the beginning. And it is nonsense. And if you believe this kind of nonsense, you become very, very depressed, because you will compare yourself with fantasy. But if you look at the real story of Nixon, you were mentioning, you see people who develop sometimes very slowly, because we are all human. We have to learn. We have to go through the learning curve. And this is what I recommend in my books. Become a little bit rational, a little bit better every day. If you improve 1% now and then, is more than enough to become very successful.
Yeah, fail your way to success, And, I think of Ray Kroc, the founder of McDonald's. He was selling blenders, and then he met the McDonald brothers, and things didn't go very easily for a while. He had to buy them out for $1 million and each, so $2 million, and he was so close to bankruptcy. But he met somebody. He didn't give up. He had a dream, and McDonald's is. I can't imagine life without McDonald's, and yet. I wonder if he knew how great McDonald's would be. I'd say yes, I wonder if George Clooney knew when he was, an underpaid actor and waiting on tables, if he knew he was going to be George Clooney one day. Probably. And I think of Colonel Sanders, late in life, didn't become successful till 65 years old with his recipe, going from door to door, saying, hey, try this, Amazing stuff. The old saying, if at first you don't succeed, try again. That's what our parents used to tell us. So what is the best method for identifying asymmetric shortcuts? And how does that differ from symmetric shortcuts?
Well, symmetric basically means facing problems directly, trying to advance in a linear way. And I have to tell you, this rarely works. So the book emphasizes asymmetric shortcuts, which require people to attack problems indirectly, to circumvent obstacles without wasting their time by doing this directly. Now, you asked me about how to identify these possibilities to circumvent obstacles. There are different methods I present in the book, but by far, I think the most effective method is to look at the opportunity cost. Opportunity cost is an economic concept that enables you to see the whole picture. Let me explain this in a second. If you have to make a decision, say, okay, I'm going to buy a car, or I'm going to enroll in university, or I'm going to take a new career, or I'm going to open a business, most people will calculate the cost by saying, okay, this study is going to cost $20,000 per year. But you also have to calculate the opportunity cost. You have to see what would you have done during these 3 years if instead of going to university you would have learned some skills. You would have been working, you would have been an apprentice, you would have been
drive a truck, whatever.
Right. And in the end, it is not only the $20,000 per year. It is not only the time and the effort of going to university. It is the opportunity cost. It's the whole picture. It's what you are not doing because you are doing that. And when you look at the opportunity cost for making decisions, I think you get a much clearer picture of what is the best option. Because people very often, they become blinded by numbers that do not mean anything. This is why you see all these millions of people going to university to waste their time studying, I don't know, gender studies or I don't know. To
riot, to demonstrate, all of it.
Sociology, yeah. And then, for God's sake, I mean, they spend, I don't know, they get into debt $50,000, $60,000, $100,000 to get a degree which is worthless because they don't look at the opportunity cost. If these people would have been working at McDonald's, as you just mentioned, after 5 years, they would be able possibly to buy their own franchise, to open their own restaurant, and they would become very successful and very wealthy.
That's right.
If that's what they wanted to do. But, not everybody. I'm all for people becoming carpenters and plumbers and learning trades. I don't believe that everybody has to go to college. But, not everybody wants to own a franchise. There are other dreams where people need to go to college.
Fair enough. But what I'm trying to say is that when you make these kind of decisions, you are easily misled by figures and statistics that do not mean anything. I think most people would make better decisions if you just try for a year some profession or some occupation that they find interesting, and then later they go to university if they really want to go to university. But you have to look at the whole picture. Very few people use the concept of opportunity cost, and I think this is the reason why we have so many foolish decisions, like we have now with this lockdown, where people look at one factor. We say, okay, lockdown has disadvantages, but did they look at the disadvantages? Did they look at the secondary and the millions of people who cannot work, who become psychologically very weak? I mean, suicidal. You have to always look at the good picture. So looking at the opportunity cost, Dave, is a key issue in any decision.
Yeah. Hey, we're going to take another break. We'll be right back. Do not go away. Hey, welcome back to the Caregiver Dave Show. I'm Dave Nassani, my co-host Adrian Gruberg, and our guest, John Vespasian. And John, Adrian's going through a tough time right now. She's moving. She's elderly. And what
a word.
Oh, give me a better word. She's a senior. Is that better? She's older. Okay, she's older. And the older we get, the harder it is to move all the stuff that we've accumulated and to emotionally let go of them. Now, you heard her say at the beginning of the show, I need to hear this because, it's hard. Moving is an emotional decision. What neighborhood do I want to live in? How big of a place do I want? Do I really want to move? Do I really want to leave my friends, my neighbors, etc.? How can you help someone like her who's struggling? I guess that's the right word. Struggling. It isn't an easy thing. It's stressful. Getting married, going through losing a loved one, moving, all these things are very, very stressful on the stress scale. What advice would you give Adrian to make this journey a little easier for her?
Well, it's the same advice I give to anybody going to turmoil. You have to realize that happiness and any kind of satisfaction, psychological or otherwise, only comes through growth. If you have a very passive, a very constrained existence where you do basically the same thing every day, you might feel safe. You might feel at a certain point protected. But I don't think you can be happy. You have to grow constantly in terms of friends, in terms of skills, in terms of interests, in terms of goals. Even if they are small things, you have to constantly be growing as a person, because to be passive, to be constrained, to be doing every day the same thing, it is the synonym of death. That you die every day a little bit, and you don't grow. And there is no alternative. And I see people who've been doing sometimes the same for a long time without really trying to improve anything. At a certain point, they give up. They say, well, I've lived and this is as much as I can get. And this is nonsense. Especially if you live in the US or you live in Europe, there are so many opportunities. There are so many interesting places, so many interesting people to meet, so many opportunities to develop new activities, new skills. There is no reason to give up. There is no reason to constrain yourself. And every change involves some discomfort. But for God's sake, what is the alternative? Just to sit there and wait for death? I mean, it's ridiculous. Yesterday I was doing a show for senior people, and they called me senior. I was super offended because I'm 55, and say, "Oh, 55, you can obtain a discount as a senior person." I say, "Give me a break for me."
Legally, I heard legally that is considered senior. It's unbelievable, but it is.
Well, for senior, senior for me means 85 or 90. Today,
a lot of people don't make it to that age.
Today, many people make it to their 85, 90. Things are improving constantly, especially if you move to a place where the weather is nice and you have a balanced lifestyle. You can live very long. And
and the ones in poor health don't. And I think most of the society and the population is in poor health. Aren't there more unhealthy people than healthy people in the world, or at least in this country?
Yes.
Yeah, so most people don't make it to that age. Maybe that's why they lowered it. If I wanted to move into a senior center or a assisted living, the age is 55.
Well,
sorry to share that with you, John. I know that hurts.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dave, I think we have to look at history and see what we can learn from that. And the patterns for a healthy lifestyle, they are known already in ancient Greece since 2,000 years ago, more than 2,000 years ago. And I think if people take the trouble just to read about it and to take, just this little example, to take herbal tea instead of drinking soda the whole day, they would improve your health substantially. They will reinforce, they will strengthen their immune system. If you just walk instead of driving the whole day, I mean, there are little things you can do. It doesn't take a lot of effort. You don't have to go to a gym and to kill yourself to improve your life. But come on, read about it. I mean, the principles are known for 2,000 years. We don't have to reinvent the wheel.
So let me ask you another question. Why do people tend to view short-term constraints as long-term impairments? That almost sounds like the formula for depression and suicide, no?
Yes, okay, but this is why we have so many cases of suicide. Depression is a pandemic. I mean, they're talking about this COVID-19. Come on, how many people are depressed in Europe or the United States or Japan? I mean, you're talking about millions and millions. And this
have you noticed they're not sharing the numbers of people who die from the flu? I mean, they mentioned it in the beginning, but I'd like to hear it again and compare it to these numbers. Are more people actually dying from COVID-19 than they are the flu? I don't know. I can't find that information anywhere anymore.
I'll send you the link.
Thank you. What is the answer, by the way, so I don't have to wait for the link?
I don't know. Eddie knows all
Okay.
that stuff. He's
All right. Sorry to
obsessive
interrupt.
about it.
Go ahead, John.
I read the latest statistics yesterday, and apparently the impact of COVID, it can be considered like a strong flu season in some areas. Depends on the country, depends on the structure of the population, but it's certainly not worse. The problem is that once you put this story on the media the whole day, it's like tracking. I mean, imagine that you get people with cancer and you track every single case. And then you become completely obsessed, and then people are afraid of drinking cola because maybe who knows. And in the end, you don't get out of your bed in the morning. So, I mean, we have to be, I think, more grounded on reality and say, look, yeah, living entails some risk, but for God's sake, unless you have a real serious precondition, I don't see so many cases of COVID serious sickness in most of the population. So I don't think we have to be paranoid. I think this is why I mentioned that growing, your emphasis should be on growing, on becoming better, you become more skilled, making more friends, not on fear, because if you focus on fear the whole day, you will not make it.
Yeah, here's an idea. Why don't we break the news, into our normal programming? Every time someone is killed in Chicago, there'd be like 17 interruptions a day. But I just wonder, why are they doing this? But that's another story. Yeah. You were going to say, Adrian?
No, nothing.
Okay. Yeah. Why is it wrong to invest yourself in what does that say? I'm trying to read my writing. Why is it wrong to invest yourself in unproven opportunities? That almost sounds like unentrepreneurial. Entrepreneurs go into areas that maybe they're not familiar. They're risk takers and so on. So is that contradiction? Unproven opportunities. Almost all opportunities that Donald Trump went into were unproven, weren't they?
Actually, very few. The problem is that we get a very distorted idea of entrepreneurs or business. And actually, people who are very good at business, who are very good entrepreneurs, they play very safe. They don't put all their eggs in one basket. They assess risk usually much better than the average person.
Yeah. Unless they're desperate, then they can afford to take the gamble because they got nothing to lose.
They got nothing to lose.
Okay.
They've tried and tried.
Like Trump in the 80s. I mean, he was $85 billion in debt. He walked outside and he saw a bum begging for some spare change, and he says, "You know what? You're $85 billion richer than me."
Well, we will see the story when we have some perspective, because I think there are many things we don't know. But when you look at studies of entrepreneurship, and there are many textbooks on that, how entrepreneurs think, actually they take very safe bets. They see a market, they test the market, they invest little by little. Most of the time they are going to use money from other people. This is how you grow a company. And if they make a mistake, and they will make mistakes, they just let it go. If you're familiar with how hedge funds operate, it's exactly the same. How do you make so much money? Well, you develop ideas. Most of them are going to be wrong, but you put a small investment in each of them, and then you watch them. And when one of them becomes successful, then you put all the money there, and then you make a bundle. And the rest, you just lose. You lose a small amount. Right. So this is how business works. It's not like in the movies where you have this guy trying to invent whatever, and then he risks his life. I mean, this is nonsense. If it was like this, we will be still in the Middle Ages, eating rubbish. I mean, no, it's not like this. It's pure fantasy. It's television. It is Netflix.
Yeah. Listen, let's take another break. We'll be right back. Don't go away. And welcome back to the Caregiver Dave Show. I'm Dave Nassani with Adrian Gruberg, and we're with John Vespasian. And John, I was going to ask you, why is the book warning readers against using a flawed logic? What is a flawed logic?
It's a flawed logic is when you say 1 plus 1 makes 5, and this seems like nonsense, but many people think like this. And this is why you see people investing themselves in schemes that are completely crazy. You see all these crazy diets that people take, and they become almost anorexic. And you see people working themselves 20 hours a day. You see these schemes that will never work. They're completely unfeasible. And over and again, human beings embrace them. And this
is that like climbing the ladder of success and realizing when you get to the top, it's leaning on the wrong building?
No, what I mean is that you have to be rational. I emphasize this in the book. Don't try to invest yourself and to try to embark yourself on schemes that are very unlikely to succeed. Whether you are in business, whether you're investing, whether you are taking care of your health, come on, look at what other people are doing. Look at what is succeeding already for hundreds, thousands of years, and just copy. I mean, you don't have to reinvent the wheel all the time. Just to have to steer away from all this fiction we watch on TV, on all these movies. They are very entertaining, but for God's sake, spend 5 minutes researching history, and you will learn more than from watching TV the whole year, because it is fiction. It is fiction. I think people should repeat this 20 times a day. It is fiction.
And I understand what you're saying, John, but isn't it also true that sometimes you should not follow the herd?
Yeah, I mean, if you can be original, perfect. But when you see the history of entrepreneurial success in the 20th century, 19th century, most of the people who become super successful, they are not great innovators. They are people who are very practical, who realize that they have to offer a product which is maybe a bit better than the competition, but not revolutionary, because otherwise people wouldn't even understand what you're talking about. You can make good money by being efficient, which I think is much more important than being a genius.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the stock market. You know, when everyone else is buying a particular stock, maybe that's the time that you should be selling it. You know what I mean?
Actually, in the stock market, I think the price tends to reflect what most people think about the future, unless you have very good reasons to go against what 99% of the people are thinking. It's very, very, very risky to catch a falling knife. I have bad experiences myself. I think
who doesn't?
The cases where I lost the most in the stock market are those I learned relatively quickly. So now I think I'm doing much better. But just to be
you need to write a book on that.
Yeah, just to be a contrarian for the sake of being contrarian, I don't think it works in the stock market. I don't think it works in any field. What you have to use is your common sense to see what is good value, to see where the future is going. And in a sense, you are mentioning entrepreneurs. And entrepreneurs, the only thing that differentiates a good entrepreneur with a normal person is that he can see a bit of the future you cannot see. Because he can imagine how things are going to be in a year or in 2 years, because he just makes the effort to think what people like, where they going every day, and they are looking for coffee and there's no coffee. And they see something that you cannot see because you are not looking. And it's not because they're geniuses, they're looking. And this is something that people should understand. And it's not magic. There is no high risk. Rarely there is high risk. There is a lot of common sense and a lot of persistence.
We have about 3 minutes left. But basically, I wanted to say that lost my train of thought. It was a good one, too. I know what it is. Why, for example, I didn't even say anything yet, but when I am let's say I want to buy some shoes, right? Or let's say I want to get some counseling. Let me start over. Let me say that I'm having trouble with my marriage, and I want to go to a marriage counselor. Would you go to a marriage counselor who's currently going through a divorce for counseling? Or would you go to a business advisor who's currently going through bankruptcy? I would say yeah, because that guy who knows bankruptcy knows more about finances than the guy who's never been bankrupt. and the counselor knows more about marital counseling than the person who didn't go through a divorce, right? Would you agree or disagree?
I would disagree. I would not take failure necessarily as a recommendation. I think when you're facing a problem, you have to go to someone who knows how to solve the problem because he has studied the problem, not necessarily because he has gone through the problem, but if you have someone who has been dealing with divorced couples for, 30 years, he knows every detail of what has to be discussed, how to solve the problems. I think it's a good investment of your time and your money. I would not spend my time and my energies dealing with someone who is in as much trouble as I am.
Well, what if you're going through the struggle? What if you're in the middle of a divorce? What if you're in the middle of a bankruptcy? Wouldn't you rather seek advice from somebody who's been through it, can tell you what's on the other end of at the end of the tunnel, and how to get there?
If the person has a philosophical mind and has drawn the right conclusions, could be a great help. But if the person is completely confused and he does not even understand the reason for the problem, he can be a buddy for drinking beer. But other than that, I don't think you will get any good advice.
Right. I think that it's a good person to have a conversation with and find out what they did, but not to seek advice from them.
All right. So what if somebody wants to read your books, get a hold of you, send you an email, talk to you on the phone? How does someone get a hold of you?
Very, very easy to find. If you just type my name on internet, on Google or wherever, John Vespasian, you will find in 1 second the books. They're available in Amazon and different outlets. There is a blog with hundreds of free articles. There's a free newsletter. Very, very easy to find. Just type John Vespasian on internet and you'll find everything in 1 second.
I think we need to know how to spell the name.
Even if you make a mistake, it doesn't matter because Google will correct it.
Google will fix it. In the next 30 seconds or so, is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we did not cover yet?
Yes. I just want to tell your audience to take a perspective of a lifetime when they are facing problems. Don't get discouraged because you are going through a sickness, you are going through divorce, you are going through any kind of problem, because normally you are going to live 85, 90, possibly 100 years. When you look back and you see these problems today that are going to last half a year, it's nothing. You will forget it very quickly. You will get over it. Think about growth, about getting better, and forget about fear, because fear is not going to take you anywhere good.
Yeah, that's great advice for teenagers too, because suicide is the largest form of death in that age group. Isn't that sad?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is the
permanent solutions to temporary problems.
Yeah, absolutely, and it comes from the fiction. Too many bad ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, John. You were a great guest, and we learned a lot, and I appreciate it. And Adrian, thank you for coming week after week. I appreciate that as well. And Adrian, you're at the caregiverspace.org, and you're also on Facebook at the Caregiver Space. You've got chat rooms. You've got every sort of resource that a caregiver could possibly want. I'm at caregiverdave.com. I've got free gifts to help caregivers get back on track and stay on track. And with that, now I can see you, Adrian. With that, I will say we'll see you next time. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Sometimes it feels like the sun will never rise, like the birds will never sing.